She was late on her first day. He called her his wife to save her. What started as a harmless lie in a coffee shop spiraled into a storm of rumors, power plays, and secrets no one was ready to face. What if your boss wasn't just watching your work, but hiding something deeper? Scandal, ambition, forbidden connection. This isn't just another office romance. It's the story everyone thinks they know, but no one really does. Subscribe to our YouTube channel now and get ready for a drama where love and reputation are on the line, and one misstep could cost everything. One lie started it all, but what if it wasn't a lie after all? The morning air in Chicago was crisp, touched with a faint golden hue as the city stirred awake. Izzy Finch stood on the platform of the Roosevelt subway station, her heart thrumming with a cocktail of nerves and excitement. Today was the day. The day she officially stepped into adulthood. The day she became an employee, a real one, at O'Connell Logistics. Her reflection in the subway window showed a woman trying her best to look the part. Freshly ironed white blouse tucked into navy slacks, a modest blazer, and her unruly chestnut curls half-pinned back. She had rehearsed everything, the elevator pitch, her greeting smile, even the exact angle to hold her resume folder so it didn't bend. Nothing could go wrong. But of course, something did. First, the train stalled halfway to her stop. A technical delay, the robotic voice explained, while Izzy clenched her jaw and glanced at her watch every 10 seconds. When it finally lurched forward again, she ran up the stairs and out into the city, heels clicking urgently against the sidewalk. Only a few blocks from the towering glass facade of O'Connell Logistics, she was hit by another crisis, one not even a spreadsheet or checklist could have prepared her for. She had to pee. It wasn't just a mild discomfort. It was the kind of emergency that made her break into a light jog, scanning every corner of the street for salvation. That was when she saw it. The Morning Brew, a hip coffee shop wedged between a boutique hotel and a pharmacy. She practically threw herself at the door. Inside, the place was alive with early risers and the scent of espresso. Jazz music hummed in the background, and a line stretched all the way to the door. Her eyes darted to the sign above the back hallway. Restrooms for customers only. Of course, she bit her lip, calculating. If she got in line, bought something, and waited to use the bathroom, she'd be late. And being late on her first day at work, her first real job, was not an option. She walked up to the counter anyway, ignoring the line, trying to catch the barista's eye. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry," she said, breathless. "I just really need to use the restroom. Can I?" The barista, a Pierce 20-something who looked entirely unbothered by her distress, shook their head. "Restrooms for paying customers. You'll have to get in line like everyone else." Izzy turned around. The line was long, painfully long. She was about to make her way to the back, defeated, when a calm voice cut through the chatter. "She's with me." Izzy froze. The voice was smooth, composed. She turned and saw a man at the front of the line, sharply dressed in a dark coat and slate-gray scarf, holding a phone in one hand, a coffee loyalty card in the other. He glanced at her and with the faintest smile added, "My wife's in a bit of a rush this morning." Izzy's mouth opened, then closed. "Wife." The barista blinked, nodded, and started punching in his order. "Okay, sir. What can I get for you too?" "Black coffee and a bottle of water," the man said, then turned to Izzy and handed her the chilled bottle like he'd known her all his life. She accepted it in a daze. "Thank you, I." He leaned in slightly, voice low and light. "Bathrooms down that hall, end of the corridor. Go." Izzy didn't hesitate. "Right, yes, thank you, sorry, I mean thank you." She nearly tripped over herself as she rushed toward the hallway, the water bottle clutched to her chest like a golden ticket. Minutes later, relieved but still flustered, she emerged. The stranger was gone. No name, no goodbye. Just a simple, quiet rescue that turned her disaster of a morning into something almost cinematic. She stood there a second longer, letting her pulse settle, then straightened her blazer, took one more breath, and stepped back out into the city. Only a few minutes left before her new life officially began. The lobby of O'Connell Logistics gleamed like the cover of a business magazine. Marble floors, glass elevators, sleek furniture in tasteful grays and blues. It was a space that demanded composure, something Izzy was rapidly running out of. She checked in with security, was issued a temporary badge, and was told to wait with the other new hires. A small group, maybe 6 or 7 of them, stood in awkward clusters near the reception desk, clutching folders and trying not to look nervous. Izzy forced herself to breathe, professional, calm, normal, just act like the whole fake wife cafe incident didn't happen. The HR rep, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Marion, arrived moments later and began ushering the group into a tour of the facility. Izzy followed obediently, absorbing names, departments, and policies, though her mind still fluttered back to the man at the coffee shop. She hadn't even seen his face properly, but something about his voice still echoed in her ears. And now, to wrap up the welcome tour, we'll introduce you to a few members of the executive team, Marion said cheerfully, leading them into a large, modern conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, including our founder and CEO, Mr. Liam O'Connell. There was a pause in the air, a shift in energy as the door opened and someone stepped inside. Izzy turned and her heart stopped. He was standing just a few feet away, dressed in a crisp navy suit that fit with effortless precision. The same composed air, the same voice, the same man. The coffee shop stranger. The man who had called her his wife less than an hour ago. Now he was smiling politely as he stepped forward to greet the group. "Good morning," he said, his tone warm but measured. "I'm Liam O'Connell. Welcome to O'Connell Logistics. We're glad to have you." Izzy couldn't breathe. Her brain did somersaults. There had to be a mistake, some kind of glitch in the matrix. She looked around, expecting someone to laugh, to reveal it was all part of some elaborate prank. But no, this was real. That was Liam O'Connell, and he was her boss. As he walked along the line, shaking hands with the new hires, Izzy tried to disappear into the carpet. When he finally reached her, their eyes met for the briefest second. Nothing. No flicker of recognition, no smirk, no raised brow. He shook her hand like he'd never seen her before in his life. "Isabel Finch, correct?" he asked, glancing at the name on her badge. "Yes," she squeaked, her voice barely a whisper, "but most people call me Izzy." "Welcome aboard, Izzy," he said, nodding, then moved on to the next person without another glance. She stood there stunned. He didn't remember, or worse, he's pretending not to. Either way, one thing was clear. The man who had helped her that morning was now the person she'd be working under. The very top of the corporate food chain. The CEO. The enigma. And now, he was looking at her like she was just another name in a long list of employees. Izzy's cheeks burned. A dozen thoughts collided in her head, but only one stuck. What the hell have I just got myself into? Izzy hadn't even finished her first week when she realized something had shifted. It started with the glances. Not the casual kind, not the ones people throw at the new girl just to size her up. These were sharper, longer, and far more curious. In the break room, in the elevators, even walking through the open-plan office, people stared, and then quickly looked away. At first, she thought she was being paranoid. Maybe it was just her own lingering awkwardness. Maybe she still radiated first-day energy, like someone who couldn't figure out how to work the coffee machine or walk too quickly down hallways. But by Thursday, she was sure. People were whispering, watching her like she was more than just a rookie. Then Clara, one of the associates from another department, leaned over during a lunch break and said with a sugary tone that instantly set off alarms in Izzy's head, "So, you and Mr. O'Connell, huh?" Izzy blinked. "What?" Clara laughed softly. Don't worry, I'm not judging. If I had a secret with the CEO, I wouldn't be walking around here looking so innocent either. Izzy's heart dropped. What are you talking about? I don't have anything to do with. But Clara had already turned away, her point made. By that evening, the rumor had taken shape. Liam O'Connell had a wife, a secret wife, and no one had ever seen her, until now. Until Izzy Finch walked in, flushed and flustered, and somehow ended up being handed a seat in one of the company's biggest projects. Because that was the other part of the drama. An announcement had gone out that afternoon. The logistics team had reshuffled. Daniel Hawthorne, a senior analyst with 10 years of experience, had been pulled off Project Stratus, a massive overhaul initiative that had been in the works for months. And his replacement, Isabel Finch, the intern-turned-assistant who hadn't even found the staff kitchen yet. The internal Slack channels practically buzzed. Some whispered she had dirt on someone. Others said she was part of some nepotism scheme. But most of the gossip gravitated toward the most tantalizing theory of all. That the sweet-looking girl from Illinois was actually Mrs. O'Connell, and the whole new hire act was just that, an act. Izzy sat frozen at her desk, rereading the project brief Marion had handed her that morning. She didn't ask for this. She had barely finished orientation. She had no idea why she was picked, or who had even recommended her. All she knew was that Daniel Hawthorne's empty desk across the room felt like a silent accusation. She wasn't stupid. She knew Liam had something to do with the transfer. Whether it was intentional or coincidental, it didn't matter. What mattered was that people now looked at her like a puzzle with a hidden answer, or worse, an intruder. Later that evening, as she stayed behind to review data sheets and catch up on everything she'd missed, she caught sight of Liam in the hallway, speaking to someone from legal. His tone was calm, confident. He didn't look in her direction. He hadn't looked at her all week. Izzy turned back to her screen, jaw clenched. This wasn't how she wanted to start her career. Not in someone else's seat, not under someone else's shadow, and definitely not as someone's supposed secret wife. She made a silent vow then. If they're going to talk about me, they're going to have to work a hell of a lot harder to ignore what I can actually do. Clara had a smile that could slice silk. From the moment she and Izzy had been introduced on orientation day, she'd maintained a perfect facade, friendly, approachable, always ready with a compliment that sounded just a little too polished to be real. She wasn't rude. That would have been too obvious. Clara preferred precision, and lately her interest in Izzy had taken on a sharper edge. It wasn't just the looks anymore. It was the comments, the loaded questions, the way she always happened to be nearby whenever someone brought up Liam O'Connell's secret wife. "Must be nice," Clara said one afternoon while they stood in the break room, waiting for the microwave to finish its low hum. "Starting a week ago and already working on Stratus. That project has a 2-year wait list just to get on the planning team." Izzy forced a smile. "I didn't ask for it, I was just assigned." Clara leaned against the counter, tilting her head. Sure, it's probably your talent, right?" The word talent hung in the air a little too long. Izzy opened her mouth to defend herself, but the microwave beeped, and Clara gave her a sweet little shrug before walking away, heels tapping like punctuation. By the end of the week, Clara wasn't the only one circling. People didn't ask Izzy direct questions. They made observations instead. They joked about how fast she got her own login credentials, how her ID badge was processed miraculously quick, how she somehow skipped over the smaller onboarding projects and was already attending meetings with executive-level staff. She tried to brush it off at first, but when 2 colleagues suddenly grew quiet as she entered the lunchroom, and one of them muttered, "Guess we should have married into management," she knew the gossip had grown teeth. That evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Izzy cornered Clara near the elevators. I don't know what you think is going on between me and Mr. O'Connell, Izzy said, voice tight but steady, but there's nothing. We met once before this job by accident. He did me a favor, that's it. Clara gave her a long, unreadable look. You don't have to explain yourself to me. Izzy blinked, thrown off. I'm not. Really? Clara interrupted with a little smile. You don't have to justify anything. Women like us. We do what we have to. Some of us network, some of us improvise. She stepped into the elevator, letting the doors slowly begin to close behind her. Good luck on Stratus, Izzy. Izzy stood frozen in place, her heart thudding in her chest. Clara didn't believe her. No one did. And the worst part, she wasn't even sure if Liam did either. Ben Chambers had been at O'Connell Logistics since the early days, back when the company's entire operations team fit into a single conference room, and coffee was brewed out of a donated machine that leaked. He had seen it grow from a bold startup into a corporate powerhouse. He had also been one of Liam O'Connell's closest allies once, until the company got too big, too polished, and Liam became more CEO than colleague. Ben didn't mind being pushed into the shadows. Not really. He understood hierarchy. What he did mind, however, was watching someone like Izzy Finch suddenly appear out of nowhere and get noticed. Noticed by Liam. Ben caught on quickly. He saw the way Liam's gaze linger on Izzy in meetings, not inappropriate, not overt, but different. Attentive, curious, and he saw Izzy shrink a little every time their eyes met, like she wasn't sure whether to look back or look away. And then there were the little things. An extra 5 minutes in the conference room after others had left. An email thread about a minor data error that turned into a detailed back-and-forth that stretched over 3 hours. A lunch delivery that included a second salad, left quietly on Izzy's desk without a note. Liam had accidentally ordered too much. Ben wasn't the only one noticing. He brought it up with Marion from HR over coffee one afternoon. Watch her, he said, nodding toward Izzy through the glass panel of the meeting room. She's not what she looks like. Marion raised a brow. You think she's manipulating him? I think she doesn't have to, Ben replied coolly. He's already offering the gold without her asking for a single coin. Marion didn't say anything, but Ben knew how these things worked. Rumors didn't have to be true to be useful. They just had to be circulating. Back on the operations floor, Izzy was trying her best to be invisible. But it wasn't easy, not when Liam kept pulling her into conversations that, to anyone else, looked personal. Your suggestions from yesterday, he said one morning, approaching her desk without warning. They were strong. I added them to the new proposal draft. Izzy blinked, startled. Oh, I didn't mean for you to use them right away. They were just rough ideas. They were better than what we had, Liam said, and then, after a pause, his voice softened. You shouldn't second-guess yourself. It was nothing, really, just feedback. But the way he said it, gentle, almost private, sent heat to her cheeks, and from the corner of her eye she saw Ben watching. That night, as Izzy packed her things, she found a yellow post-it stuck to her monitor. People are starting to talk, don't give them more to say. B. She stared at it for a long time. Part of her wanted to crumple it and toss it in the trash. The other part knew Ben wasn't just being petty. He was warning her. And he wasn't wrong. The trip to Milwaukee was meant to be routine, a site visit, a presentation, and a walkthrough of one of O'Connell's key partner warehouses. Just a day and a half out of town. In and out. No drama. That was the plan. But nothing about Izzy's life lately seemed to follow plans. She wasn't supposed to be on the trip at all. Initially, it was Clara's assignment, but at the last minute there was a reshuffle, officially due to schedule conflicts. Unofficially, Clara had smiled just a little too sweetly when she handed off the travel binder. I'm sure you'll make a great impression, she'd said. Mr. O'Connell seems to think highly of you. Izzy had barely slept the night before they left. Sharing an itinerary with Liam, let alone a rental car and client dinners, felt like walking through a minefield barefoot. They drove up together, Izzy in the passenger seat of a sleek black company SUV, trying not to fiddle with her bracelet, trying not to steal glances at Liam. He was quiet for the first hour, his eyes fixed on the road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the gearshift. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was charged. "So," he said eventually, "have you always wanted to work in logistics?" It was such an ordinary question. Izzy let out a surprised laugh. "Honestly, no. I wanted to study environmental science. I thought I'd be working in policy or writing grants for green initiatives. But then I interned at a nonprofit and realized I hated bureaucracy. Logistics felt cleaner, more purposeful." Liam glanced at her. It's a rare thing, finding purpose in something most people don't understand. "Is that what it is for you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Purpose?" His jaw tightened slightly. There was a pause. "It was," he said, "at the beginning." They didn't talk much more after that. But later in the hotel lobby, after a successful meeting and a dinner with the warehouse team, Liam invited her for a drink. Not at the bar, on the rooftop. She almost said no. Almost. The night air was cool but pleasant, and Milwaukee glittered below them like a spilled box of lights. Liam leaned against the railing, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. He spoke quietly. "My brother's name was Thomas. He was the one who started all this. O'Connell Logistics wasn't even supposed to be mine." Izzy sat beside him still, listening. "He died in a car accident the night before our first major pitch meeting," Liam continued. "He was always the visionary, the dreamer. I was just supposed to keep the numbers straight, but I showed up the next morning, delivered the pitch anyway. People called it brave. I think it was just guilt." He looked at her then, not like a CEO, not like a man trying to impress a woman, just a person tired, a little broken. "I've been carrying this company on my back ever since. Maybe too tightly. Maybe I'm afraid if I let go, I'll lose what little I have left of him." Izzy didn't know what to say. She reached out, resting her hand lightly on his. "You haven't let go," she said softly. "You've built something he would have been proud of." Liam looked down at their hands, then back at her. "It's easier to carry something heavy when someone's willing to walk beside you." The rooftop fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was full of unspoken things, of flickering possibilities, of something beginning. The Monday after Milwaukee was colder than usual, outside and between them. Izzy arrived early, trying to shake the echo of that rooftop conversation from her mind. She'd barely slept the past few nights, haunted not by guilt, but by confusion. Liam had let his guard down with her in a way she hadn't expected, and for a moment she'd wanted to do the same, but something inside her pulled back. She couldn't afford to fall into something blurred and uncertain, not when people were already watching her every move, not when rumors were already sharpening their claws. When Liam walked past her desk that morning, he offered her a small smile, the kind only she seemed to notice. It lingered just long enough to ask a question without words. She didn't return it. The next time he approached her, this time with a proposal for her to sit in on a private strategy session, she declined. "I think it might be better if I stay focused on the logistics side for now," she said carefully. "I don't want to step outside my lane." Liam paused. "It's not about lanes, Izzy. It's about contribution. You have insight others don't." "I appreciate that," she replied, "but I think some people already feel like I'm getting too much too soon." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "Is this about what people think," he asked, quieter now, "or what you think?" Izzy looked down at her notepad. "It's both." The meeting invitation was rescinded later that afternoon. She told herself it was for the best, that she'd drawn a boundary, that keeping things professional would protect her, her job, her name, her sanity. But every time she heard his voice in the hallway or caught a glimpse of him during all-hands meetings, something tugged at her. Meanwhile, Liam didn't reach out again. Not directly, not personally. In meetings, his tone was strictly formal. His feedback efficient, polite, nothing more. He didn't linger, he didn't look. At first, Izzy thought he was just giving her space. Then she realized he was building a wall. And yet, even behind that wall, something remained unresolved, something unfinished. She saw it one evening during a team wrap-up meeting when their eyes accidentally met across the conference table. His were steady, unreadable, but beneath the surface there was disappointment. Not in her, in the distance she'd created. She had chosen professionalism over possibility, and it was breaking something neither of them had the courage to name. It started with a whisper, just another hallway murmur that should have meant nothing. By mid-morning, the whisper had turned into tension thick enough to feel in the air. Izzy was at her desk, sorting through the updated delivery schedules, when Clara walked by with her phone in hand and a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nice photo," she murmured under her breath. Izzy froze. What photo? But Clara had already moved on. Frowning, Izzy opened the company's internal messaging board. The logistics thread, usually filled with warehouse updates and routing changes, had a new post pinned by an anonymous user. "Interesting start to the week. Look familiar, Mrs. O'Connell." Attached was a grainy photo, obviously taken from across the street or through a shop window. But the subjects were unmistakable. Liam standing at the counter of the morning brew, reaching across to hand a bottle of water to a flustered-looking Izzy. The caption read, "Some people skip the interview, others just marry the boss." Her chest tightened, she couldn't move. The angle, the timing, it was that morning. Her very first day. The photo captured the exact moment Liam had called her his wife to get her access to the restroom. A throwaway comment, a harmless white lie, but taken out of context, it was damning. Within minutes, whispers turned into questions. By lunchtime, it was no longer a joke, it was a problem. That afternoon, she was summoned by the Internal Conduct and Ethics Committee. The conference room was colder than usual, or maybe it was just the atmosphere. 3 faces stared at her across the table, stern, unreadable. The head of the committee, Mr. Langford, folded his hands together. "We've received a report and visual evidence suggesting that your relationship with Mr. O'Connell predates your official hearing date," he began. Izzy swallowed. "It doesn't." He continued, unfazed. "The photo in question implies personal familiarity. Given your expedited onboarding and current role on Project Stratus, we have a duty to investigate potential conflicts of interest." "It was a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We met once, at a coffee shop. I was in a panic. He helped me, that was it. He didn't even know I was coming to work here." "And yet, you were assigned directly to one of the CEO's pet projects within your first week." Her breath caught. "I didn't ask for that, I didn't even want it at first." The questions kept coming, each one sharper than the last, not because they accused her directly, but because they didn't believe her. Every answer was met with a raised eyebrow or a tight nod. By the time she left the room, her hands were shaking. No one said the word suspension, but it hung in the air like smoke. She wasn't suspended, not yet, but she was being watched. And the worst part, she didn't know if Liam had seen the photo, or if he was watching her too. The next morning, Izzy found an envelope on her desk. It wasn't the kind you ignored. Stamped with the company's legal department seal, the document inside was short and clinical. A formal request for a written statement regarding her involvement with Mr. O'Connell prior to her employment, and any undue influence on her current role. She stared at the words for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just a procedural formality. This was an accusation dressed in polite legalese. They wanted her to explain herself, to defend herself, as if she had done something wrong. Clara passed by, slow and deliberate, eyes flicking toward the envelope and then back to her screen. Two other coworkers nearby glanced at Izzy with barely concealed curiosity. The air around her felt poisonous, saturated with implication. Izzy stood up. She didn't head to HR. She didn't head to her manager. She went straight to the 27th floor. The executive wing was as quiet as always, polished glass, low murmurs behind closed doors. She walked past the assistants, past the stairs, and stopped in front of Liam's office. She hesitated for only a second, then knocked once and pushed the door open. He was at his desk, typing something, but looked up immediately. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw her. Concern followed quickly. "Izzy." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I got the letter," she said. "They want a written statement." He leaned back slightly. "I know, I just found out this morning. I'm handling it." "No," she cut in, voice still low but firm. "You can't." His brows furrowed. "Izzy, this isn't what you think this is." "It is, Liam," she said, finally letting the hurt crack through. "It's exactly what it looks like. It looks like I slept my way into this company, into this position, into your favor, and no matter what I say, that's what they've already decided." "I haven't decided that," he said quietly. "But it doesn't matter what you believe, does it?" she whispered. "Not when everyone else already sees me as a walking scandal." He stood, taking a step toward her. "You don't have to go through this alone. Let me fight this. Let me protect you." She gave a bitter smile. "That's the problem. If you protect me, they'll think it proves them right. And if I stay, I'll be the example everyone uses when they want to tear another woman down." She reached into her bag, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. Her resignation. Liam took it with visible reluctance. His fingers held it for a second too long. "I don't want this," he said. "I don't either," she replied, "but I want to leave with my name intact." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them like a frayed rope. Then she turned, hand already on the door. "I hope," she said quietly without looking back, "you never have to know what it's like to earn everything, only to have people say you didn't." And with that she walked out. No goodbyes. No hugs. No headlines. Just the sound of her heels on marble, fatting with every step she took away from the man who had almost, been something more. The day after Izzy left, the office felt colder. Not literally, HVAC still hummed with corporate precision, but something essential had shifted. Her absence wasn't loud. It was a silence that sank into corners and clung to conversations. The chair at her desk stayed empty longer than it should have. No one dared touch her things. Liam said nothing. Not to the team, not to the press, not even to his assistant, who handed him her resignation letter with a pointed look and the question in her eyes, "Do you want to respond to this officially?" He only shook his head, no statement. The board, on the other hand, wasn't so restrained. Her name came up during a closed-door meeting that same week. Her departure had stirred more speculation than her presence ever did. Some members felt it proved guilt. Others were just relieved the distraction was gone. Liam sat at the head of the table, spine straight, fingers clasped calmly in front of him. He listened. And then quietly he pushed back. Not with emotion, not with defiance, with data. She was top of her class. Her internship performance was reviewed by an external partner and ranked in the top 3% of her cohort. Her preliminary work on Project Stratus identified an optimization route we'd overlooked for months. If her name weren't caught up in rumors, every single one of you would be calling her a rising star. There was a long silence after that. No one replied, but he saw it in their eyes. They weren't going to fight him on it. They didn't like scandal, but they liked results, and Izzy had delivered. Still, when the meeting adjourned, no one suggested calling her back. Liam didn't either. Not because he didn't want to. Because he believed, wrongly, that she didn't want him to. In her resignation letter, she hadn't asked for his help, hadn't left room for rescue, and for the first time in a very long time, Liam didn't know what to say that wouldn't make it worse. So he said nothing. Izzy, miles away in a different part of the city, took his silence for confirmation, that he'd let her go without a fight, that everything they'd shared, fleeting as it was, had been only that, fleeting, a moment, a phase, a misreading. She told herself she was fine, poured herself into work at a non-profit organization helping underrepresented youth find internships, something quieter, something safe. But sometimes, in the silence of the subway or while pouring her morning coffee, she'd remember the way Liam had looked at her, on the rooftop, across a boardroom, in the stillness between words. She remembered and she wondered. If I had stayed, would he have stopped me? Liam, back in his glass-walled office, stared at the empty spot in the meeting room where she used to sit. And he wondered. If I'd stopped her, would she have stayed? The office of the nonprofit was tucked above a community library on the quieter side of the city, far from gleaming high-rises and glass-walled boardrooms. The furniture didn't match. The coffee was terrible. The Wi-Fi was temperamental. But for the first time in months, Izzy could breathe. Here, no one cared where she came from. No one whispered behind their screens or glanced sideways when she walked in. Her title was simple: Program Coordinator. Her tasks: help underprivileged students prepare for internships, write resumes, simulate interviews, connect them to real-world opportunities. It was meaningful, grounded, pure in a way O'Connell Logistics had never been. She didn't check the company's name in the news anymore. She unfollowed their social media accounts. She deleted Liam's number from her phone, not because she wanted to forget, but because she knew she'd stare at it every night if she didn't. Still, he found his way into her thoughts. Always at night. In the quiet, after the city dimmed and her apartment filled with soft shadows, she'd lie awake and remember the look in his eyes the last time they saw each other. That complicated mix of restraint and regret, like he'd wanted to say something more, but believed he didn't have the right. She replayed their rooftop conversation over and over, the weight in his voice when he spoke of Thomas, the unexpected softness, the unspoken invitation, and how she had pulled away, not from him exactly, but from what it might have meant. Had she been too harsh, too afraid? Some nights she wanted to believe he'd forgotten her, that she was just a small detour in a life far bigger than hers. It would have been easier that way. But then she'd remember the way he used to glance at her mid-meeting, like she was the only person in the room who mattered. The way he listened when she spoke. The way his hand had hovered, hesitating, always hesitating, like he was afraid that touching her too directly would make everything too real. That kind of attention didn't just vanish. Neither did the ache it left behind. Still, Izzy kept showing up every day at the nonprofit, clipboard in hand, smile in place, pretending that the past was a different lifetime. But no matter how hard she tried, Liam O'Connell lived somewhere in the spaces between her heartbeats. Not present, but never quite gone. The investigation concluded without fireworks. No policy violations, no breaches of conduct, no favoritism proven. The final report was clinical, almost dismissive, just a few lines in a memo buried deep in the weekly company-wide email. The board has reviewed all internal matters regarding Project Stratus assignments and finds no further cause for concern. Mr. Liam O'Connell will remain as CEO. Victory on paper. But inside the walls of O'Connell Logistics, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't relief that followed, it was quiet, too quiet. Liam returned to work with the same sharp suits, the same punctuality, the same flawless presentations. But something essential had dulled. His voice, once calm but purposeful, became flat, almost mechanical. He no longer lingered after meetings. No more hallway greetings. No more subtle smiles. The staff noticed. At first they blamed the investigation, the stress, the scrutiny, but the truth was simpler, heavier. He missed her. He didn't say it. Of course not. He wasn't the kind of man who confessed anything easily, least of all pain. But the signs were there for anyone who had worked with him long enough. He stopped coming in early. He skipped lunch more often than not. He rejected a press invitation for a Forbes feature, something he'd usually delegate with enthusiasm. And he no longer passed by the desk near the west window, the one that still held the faintest trace of her perfume. Marion from HR tried once to make conversation during a leadership check-in. "You've been quieter," she said carefully. Liam looked up from his laptop, eyes blank. "I've been busy." "You're always busy," she replied, "but you used to be present." He didn't respond, just gave a curt nod and returned to his screen. Behind closed doors, Liam reviewed project roadmaps like a machine. He approved budgets, signed deals, mentored new hires with the same clinical precision that once made him brilliant. But he no longer asked why, only how much and by when. The color had drained from the company's heart, and no one dared say it aloud, but everyone felt it. O'Connell Logistics hadn't lost a project manager. It had lost its pulse. The calm didn't last. 2 weeks after the investigation quietly closed, a new storm arrived, silent at first, like the rustling of leaves before a tornado. It started with a leaked screenshot, then another, then an anonymous tip sent to the company's ethics hotline. This time, it wasn't about photos or whispers. It was about messages. A string of supposed texts, flirtatious, suggestive, between Liam O'Connell and Isabel Finch, dated 2 weeks before her official hearing date. Screenshots showed her name, his initials, sentiments that danced far beyond professionalism. "Can't wait to see you in the office," winking face. "Thinking about our coffee moment. Maybe next time no witnesses. And worst of all, I'll take care of your onboarding. Just say the word." The screenshots spread like wildfire, first through Slack, then across the back channels of the company's inner circles. Someone even leaked them to a minor business gossip site under the headline, "CEO's Secret Love Affair, Nepotism or Scandal." This time there was no silent memo. The board called an emergency meeting. Liam was summoned immediately. The air in the boardroom was brittle, lined with suspicion. The chairman placed the printed screenshots on the table with a measured hand. "We need an explanation," he said flatly. Liam stared at the papers, his face unreadable. "They're fake," he said. "I never sent these, and Izzy certainly didn't either." "Can you prove that?" another board member asked. "I can prove that my messaging app shows no such history," Liam replied, his voice cold. "But you already knew that. You've already checked my devices during the first inquiry. This is a fabrication." The chairman leaned back. "We're aware, but the optics are worse now. This is a second incident, and it's going public." Liam's jaw tensed. Back at her small nonprofit office, Izzy's phone exploded with messages she hadn't asked for, former colleagues, confused friends, even a journalist or two. It took only a few minutes before she found the leaked images herself. Her heart dropped. The formatting was wrong. The font was inconsistent. One message had a timestamp that didn't even exist in her time zone. Clumsy, but believable to people who wanted to believe the worst. She stared at the words someone else had faked in her name and felt sick. And then furious. She knew only one person capable of doing this, someone close enough to know the timelines, the tone, the history. Someone with motive, resentment, and the perfect cover of just another coworker. Clara. Back at O'Connell, Liam stood alone in his office, hands resting on the glass window overlooking the city. He had spent months holding back, thinking distance would protect Izzy. And now someone had used that distance to burn them both. He didn't know if she'd ever forgive him, not for what had happened, but for not stopping it before it began. It was Ben who finally uncovered the truth, not out of loyalty to Izzy, nor sympathy for Liam, but because the entire situation reeked of something too familiar. He'd seen this kind of sabotage before. Years ago, a junior manager had been quietly dismissed after a similar scandal. A promising woman, sharp as hell, suddenly accused of manipulating her way into a leadership track position. It had nearly derailed her career until she left without a word. Back then, no one looked too deeply. But this time, Ben did. A late-night audit of internal access logs revealed something strange. A user had pulled archived data from HR's email servers, messages from months before Izzy's hire, encrypted and tucked deep in a backup folder. Someone without authorization. Someone using a bypass key. Only a few people had that kind of access. Clara was one of them. It didn't take long for Ben to find more. Forged metadata, screenshot editing software downloaded to her company laptop, and most damning of all, an auto-saved Photoshop file that hadn't been deleted properly. Ben stared at the screen. There it is. He didn't report it to HR. He went straight to Liam. The confrontation wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no security dragging anyone away. Liam walked into the Thursday town hall meeting, one scheduled to address the incident, with a folder in one hand and his expression carved from granite. Executives, managers, and department heads turned to him with varying shades of discomfort and expectation. He stepped up to the mic, flipped open the folder, and spoke calmly. The screenshots that circulated earlier this week were fabricated, he said. We have verified proof that the materials were created with intent to deceive. The individual responsible accessed confidential data without authorization and manipulated it to support a false narrative. Murmurs spread through the room. Phones shifted discreetly under desks. Liam continued. This wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attempt to destroy the credibility of one of the most capable and ethical employees we've had in the last year, Isabel Finch. A hush fell over the room. No more denial, no more ambiguity. Liam O'Connell had spoken Izzy's name, not as a liability but as someone worth defending. And in that moment, everything changed. We failed to protect her, he said, voice low but resolute. And for that, I take full responsibility. From the back of the room, Clara paled. Someone from legal was already approaching her with quiet but firm urgency. Ben, standing near the exit, watched the fallout unfold. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. But when Liam stepped down from the podium and looked across the crowd, directly into the camera of the internal live stream, Ben knew who the CEO was really speaking to. Izzy. Not with words, but with something far louder. I see you, I believe you, and this time I won't let them take you down. The community center was nothing like O'Connell Logistics. There were no sleek corridors or marble floors, no glass offices or hushed boardrooms. Instead, there were chipped tiles, walls lined with corkboards covered in flyers, and the constant hum of old fluorescent lights overhead. Izzy was finishing up a mentorship workshop when she saw him. Liam, standing just inside the doorway, slightly out of place in his tailored coat and leather shoes, holding a box of donated laptops like any other volunteer. He looked around the room, bright with chatter and laughter, and then his eyes found her. She froze. For a moment, time stilled. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Just waited. She walked over slowly, heart hammering, Her hands were still dusty with whiteboard marker and her hair was pulled back messily. She didn't look like a woman who'd once been at the center of a corporate firestorm. She looked real, tired, alive. "Hi," he said softly, as if afraid she might turn and walk away. She didn't. "You're delivering tech now?" she asked, half teasing, half trying to steady her voice. "I figured it was the only way to see you without someone accusing me of conflict of interest," he said with a faint smile. "Also, I promised I'd donate after you left. Took me too long." She looked down at the box in his arms. "MacBooks. I said I'd make it count." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the noise of the world moving on around them. Then Izzy asked the one thing she hadn't stopped wondering. "Why didn't you stop me?" Liam exhaled slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "Because I thought you wanted to go, and because I thought if I fought for you, it would have only made things harder." "It did," she said, eyes not leaving his. "Your silence did." He nodded, jaw tightening, taking the weight of that truth without defense. "I know." Izzy swallowed. "And after everything, after they dragged my name again, why now?" His gaze softened. "Because I was wrong to think I could protect you by disappearing. I should have stood beside you, not behind you, not above you." He set the box down slowly, as if letting go of something heavier than laptops. "I'm not here as a CEO," he added, "or as the man who once called you his wife to cut a bathroom line." She laughed short, unexpected, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. "I'm just here," he said, "as someone who misses you, and who finally stopped being a coward long enough to say it." Izzy looked at him, really looked. He wasn't polished, not in this moment. His eyes were tired, his voice worn, his heart open in a way it had never been inside those glossy walls. No titles, no power, just Liam. And for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe this, them, wasn't a mistake that had spiraled out of control. Maybe it was just the wrong timing. And now it was. A week later, the email came. Subject: Ray. Proposal: Community Logistics Integration Initiative. Sender: Marion Leung, HR Director, O'Connell Logistics. Tone: respectful, professional, but unmistakably hopeful. They wanted Izzy back. Not as an assistant, not as someone in Liam's shadow. As the project lead for a newly established initiative that aimed to partner with nonprofits and local governments to improve urban logistics infrastructure for underserved communities. A model Izzy had quietly dreamed of long before she ever stepped into the glass elevators of O'Connell. The proposal was detailed. Her salary was more than fair. The team structure was sound. And most importantly, the project would operate with independence. No more special assignments that painted targets on her back. This was her blueprint, her voice, her future. Izzy stared at the screen in her small shared office, the clamor of community center volunteers humming in the background. It should have been an easy decision. But it wasn't until Liam showed up again. This time, not with a box or apology. He came alone, with his sleeves rolled and his usual poise stripped bare. "I didn't want them to send the offer before I spoke to you," he said, standing at the open door. "You deserve to know that it's yours. No interference, no politics, no expectations." Izzy looked at him, expression unreadable. "And you? What about me? If I say yes, you and I will be working in the same building again." "I'll keep my distance," he said, almost too quickly, "if that's what you want." She took a step forward, arms crossed, not defensive but thoughtful. "No," she said simply, "that's not what I want." He blinked. "I want you in my life, Liam," she continued, voice steady. "But this time not with blurred lines, no hiding, no half steps. If we're doing this work in life, we do it equally, as partners, as two people who stand on the same ground." Liam held her gaze, and for the first time she saw something deeper behind those gray eyes. Relief. Not because he'd won her back. because she was choosing herself and him, and demanding he rise to meet her. "You'll have full autonomy," he said quietly, "and I'll earn my place beside you, not above, not ahead, beside." She nodded once, a quiet pact sealed. The next morning, her return was announced. Some eyes widened, some smiled, a few narrowed. But no one could say she hadn't earned it. And when she walked through the lobby of O'Connell Logistics again, head high, badge clipped, heart calm, she wasn't the girl running late to her first job anymore. She was Izzy Finch. And this time, she wasn't stepping into anyone's shadow. She was walking toward her own light, with Liam not leading the way, but walking right beside her. The return of Izzy Finch didn't make headlines. There were no dramatic speeches, no whispered apologies in the hallway. What greeted her was something quieter and far more meaningful. Respect. It wasn't instant, but it was real. A few curious glances, one or two raised eyebrows, but then came nods from people who remembered how she handled herself when everything fell apart. A small smile from a manager who'd once avoided eye contact. A genuine welcome back from someone in HR. And Ben, of all people, sent her a one-line email. "Told you they'd come around." She settled into her new office, modest but bright, overlooking the west side of the city. On the door, Isabel Finch, Director of Social Logistics Initiatives. Her team was a mix of old and new faces, some from the community nonprofits she'd worked with, some from O'Connell's own structure. For the first time, she wasn't trying to prove she belonged. She was building something of her own. And Liam. Liam stayed back. Not emotionally, but physically, intentionally. No more unexpected meetings, no more convenient favors. He let her lead her own meetings, make her own mistakes, win her own battles. When they passed in the hallway, it was just a smile, a gentle look, and once, during a Friday staff social, he handed her a drink and said simply, "I like watching you run things." He still had the weight of a CEO on his shoulders, but something about him had shifted. Lighter somehow, more present. He no longer micromanaged decisions that didn't need him. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak to Izzy, it wasn't behind closed doors or in hurried, coded moments. It was real, open, easy. They didn't declare anything. They didn't need to. Their connection, once so fragile and complicated, now found its rhythm in simplicity. Morning coffees shared in the break room like any other colleagues. A glance across the boardroom table that meant you've got this. A message at the end of a long day. Dinner tonight, no work talk, just us. In the midst of project pitches, logistics models, and board reviews, something bloomed between them, unforced, unfiltered. Love, yes. But this time, built not on rescue or secrecy. Built on mutual respect. On earned trust. And on the simple, undeniable truth that when both people walk beside each other, equally, honestly, no rumor, no scandal, no system can truly break what they choose to build together. The annual shareholders' meeting of O'Connell Logistics was always a carefully orchestrated affair, sleek presentations, scripted remarks, curated success metrics. Cameras rolled, investors murmured, executives played their part with smiles as polished as their shoes. But this year felt different. Liam stood at the podium, back straight, suit immaculate as always, but there was a softness in his gaze, a calmness in his breath. He'd already moved through the standard agenda: quarterly growth, international expansion, sustainability benchmarks. Then came the final slide. It wasn't a graph, it was a photograph. Not a corporate logo, not a warehouse, but a candid snapshot. A woman, Izzy, standing in front of a whiteboard, sleeves rolled, hair tied up, surrounded by a team scribbling ideas around her. She wasn't posing, she was leading. The room fell quiet. Liam took a breath, his voice steady but low, enough to draw everyone in. Leadership doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it walks through the door late on its first day, soaked from the rain, carrying nothing but hope, and gets accused of everything but what she truly is, capable, brilliant, and relentless in her integrity. He paused, looked across the room, locking eyes with no one and everyone. I met Isabel Finch in the most ordinary way at a coffee shop. She needed help. I offered a momentary fix, a small gesture. He smiled faintly. People called it favoritism. They called it scandal. What they didn't see was the way she refused every shortcut, fought every assumption, and walked away from this company to protect it. He looked down briefly, then back up, with more fire in his voice now, not defensive but proud. I once saved her for a moment. He stepped away from the podium, no slides now, no script, just words from the chest. But this time she saved me, from silence, from pride, from believing I had to do everything alone. Another pause. And if anyone here still questions whether she belongs, look around. You're not just investing in numbers anymore. You're investing in people like her. Because the future of O'Connell Logistics doesn't look like me. It looks like us. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire hall erupted, not in polite applause but a standing ovation. Genuine, thunderous, cathartic. Executives rose. Investors nodded. Even Marion in HR wiped her eye discreetly with a tissue she pretended not to have. Izzy, watching from the side of the room, stood still, frozen. Until Liam looked toward her, eyes soft, steady, and gave the smallest, most honest nod she had ever seen. A thank you. A promise. A beginning. The morning brew hadn't changed. Same dark wood counters. Same scuffed floors. Same hum of jazz weaving through the low buzz of early morning customers. But for Izzy, the space felt different now, like the beginning of a story she hadn't realized she'd already started writing. Liam was waiting at their usual corner table, a soft grin playing at his lips as he held 2 cups of coffee. She noticed the detail immediately. Hers was oat milk, half sugar. Perfect. He always remembered. She sat across from him, fingers wrapped around the warm paper cup, watching him with a kind of fondness that didn't need words anymore. Feels like déjà vu, he said, glancing around the shop. Except this time you're not sprinting for the bathroom. Izzy laughed. Progress. A pause settled between them, not awkward, just full, of memory, of meaning. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, neatly folded napkin. The same kind they used to grab in panic during morning meetings, scribbled with notes and numbers. But this one held only 6 words, handwritten in her neat, looping script. Would you marry me this time? Liam blinked once, then again. He looked up and she was smiling, not shyly, not nervously, but with certainty. If that day, she said softly, you hadn't called me your wife, would you have the courage to do it today when it's real? Liam's eyes didn't waver. He reached across the table, took her hand, and without missing a beat said, only if I get to call you that for the rest of my life. She laughed, and this time it came with tears, happy, inevitable ones. He slid a small box from his coat pocket and placed it beside her napkin, almost sheepish. I had this for weeks, was just waiting for a rooftop or a boardroom or something ridiculous. She opened it. Simple, elegant. A ring shaped like a story that had finally found its ending, or maybe just its second chapter. Izzy looked at him, eyes shining. This is better, she whispered. Because this time I chose it, we chose us. Outside the window, the city bustled like it always did. But inside, at the same cafe where everything once began in a blur of chaos and caffeine, 2 people finally stopped running. They were home. The first warm breeze of spring drifted through Chicago like a whispered promise. Sidewalks were alive again, flowers blooming at street corners, cafe patios filled with laughter, jackets slung over chairs instead of shoulders. Inside the morning brew, the corner table by the window was already taken. Not by strangers, not anymore. It belonged to them now. Izzy sat cross-legged on the bench, her hand lazily wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching people rush by outside. Liam sat across from her, flipping through the final draft of a proposal, the official paperwork for the Thomas O'Connell Fellowship, a scholarship designed to support first-generation college students pursuing careers in supply chain and logistics. Full tuition, housing stipend, and a 6-month internship with us after graduation, he said, tapping the last page with a proud smile. Thomas would have liked that. Izzy leaned over, brushing her fingers against his. He would have loved it. They sat for a moment, letting the idea settle into something real. The fellowship wasn't just a gesture. It was a legacy, a way to give meaning to everything they had fought through: scandal, distance, pride, fear, and a way to make sure someone else could start their story without the same roadblocks. Across the cafe, a new barista was putting up photos on a small corkboard, a patchwork wall of memories, customer candids, and inside jokes. Izzy noticed a new one, slightly grainy, clearly printed from a phone but unmistakable. It was them, captured from the early days. She was flushed, holding a bottle of water like it was a lifeline. He stood beside her, mid-smile, mid-lie, mid-magic. Below it in bold marker, the caption read: Vi letter 1 E3 toy hoi V letter 1 ED9 I chut thoi. Vatoi thai kong bao gi I letter 1 EDD. V letter 1 ED9 I kai yeru ko letter 1 EA5Y. My wife was just in a hurry, but I've never rushed when it came to loving her. Izzy laughed softly when she saw it. That's cheesy. Liam tilted his head toward her. You're the one who proposed in a coffee shop. I was being efficient, she said, feigning seriousness. Romantically efficient, he corrected. She reached across the table, intertwining her fingers with his. Just don't forget, Mr. O'Connell, this time I really am your wife. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, once and always. Outside, the morning kept unfolding, just another day to the rest of the world. But to them, it was everything. A beginning, not an end. A promise sealed not by grand declarations, but by coffee cups, laughter, and the quiet certainty of two people who had already chosen each other, once and forever.